sometimes the most powerful lessons come wrapped in the most unexpected packages. In a world where respect is earned through rank, experience, and dedication, assumptions can be dangerous territory. What happens when split-second judgments collide with hidden truths? When a moment of perceived disrespect reveals layers of courage, sacrifice, and honor that run deeper than any uniform stripe or medal? This is the story of Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Martinez, a decorated Marine whose journey from a small Texas border town to the highest echelons of military leadership was paved with challenges that would have broken lesser spirits. It's about the young Marine who thought he knew enough about power and respect to make a choice that would echo through the halls of Camp Pendleton for years to come. But, most importantly, it's about what happens when the carefully constructed walls we build around our assumptions come crashing down in the most public way possible. In the unforgiving world of military hierarchy, where every gesture carries weight and every interaction is measured against the backdrop of honor and duty, one lunch break was about to become a masterclass in humility, respect, and the dangerous game of judging a book by its cover. Sarah Martinez learned about fighting before she learned about fairness. Growing up in Laredo, Texas, in the 1990s, she was the daughter of a single mother who worked double shifts at a local factory to keep food on the table. Their neighborhood wasn't the kind of place where dreams were encouraged, but Rosa Martinez had different plans for her daughter. Every evening, after her 12-hour shifts, she would sit at their small kitchen table helping Sarah with homework, speaking in a mixture of Spanish and English about opportunities that existed beyond the dusty streets of their border town. The first time Sarah mentioned wanting to join the military, she was 14 years old. She had been reading about women in combat roles, fascinated by stories of female pilots and officers who were breaking barriers in what had traditionally been a male-dominated field. Her mother's reaction was immediate and fierce. Rosa had lost her brother in Vietnam and carried a deep distrust of military institutions. She saw them as machines that consumed young people from poor families, offering promises of education and advancement while delivering danger and heartbreak. But Sarah was different from other kids in her neighborhood. While her classmates spent their afternoons at the local shopping center or hanging around street corners, she was at the library, devouring books about military history and strategy. She read about women like Colonel Margarethe Kammermeyer and Captain Linda Bray, understanding that her path would be more difficult than that of her male counterparts, but also more meaningful. The military represented something her civilian life couldn't offer, a meritocracy where performance mattered more than background, where leadership could be earned rather than inherited. During her junior year of high school, Sarah began working part-time at a local gym to save money for college. It was there that she met Staff Sergeant James Morrison, a Marine recruiter who was using the facility during his off hours. Morrison was a career Marine with 3 combat deployments under his belt, and he recognized something special in the quiet teenager who approached her workouts with military precision. She would arrive at exactly the same time each day, follow a structured routine, and push herself harder than most of the adult men in the facility. Morrison began offering Sarah advice about fitness and discipline, never initially mentioning recruitment. He understood that young people from backgrounds like hers had heard enough sales pitches from adults who promised them the world. Instead, he talked about the Marines as a way of thinking, a commitment to excellence that extended far beyond military service. He spoke about the brotherhood, the sense of purpose, and the way military training could transform not just physical capabilities but mental resilience. The conversation that changed Sarah's life happened on a Thursday afternoon in March of her senior year. She had just finished a particularly intense workout when Morrison approached her with a serious expression. He told her about a new program the Marines were implementing, designed to identify and develop female officers who could eventually serve in combat roles. The program was selective, rigorous, and would require a commitment that most 18-year-olds weren't prepared to make. But Morrison believed Sarah had the temperament and drive to not just succeed, but excel. Sarah's mother's reaction to the news was explosive. Rosa had worked too hard and sacrificed too much to watch her daughter disappear into what she saw as a violent, unforgiving institution. The fights between mother and daughter lasted for weeks, with Rosa alternating between tears and anger, begging Sarah to consider other options. She offered to take out loans for college, to move to a different city, anything that would keep her daughter safe and close to home. But Sarah had already made her decision. She spent hours researching the Marine Corps, understanding that this was more than a career choice, it was a complete transformation of identity. She read about the training at Paris Island, the physical and mental demands that would push her beyond anything she had ever experienced. She understood that she would be entering a world where her gender would make her both a pioneer and a target, where every mistake would be magnified and every success scrutinized. The day Sarah left for Marine Corps Recruit Depot Paris Island, her mother drove her to the airport in silence. At the gate, Rosa finally spoke, her voice thick with emotion and resignation. She told Sarah that she was proud of her determination, even if she couldn't understand her choice. She made Sarah promise to write every week and to remember where she came from, no matter how far the Marines took her. Recruit training was everything Sarah had expected and worse. The physical demands were brutal, pushing her body to limits she hadn't known existed. The mental pressure was even more challenging, with drill instructors who seemed determined to find her breaking point. As one of only 6 women in her training company, Sarah faced additional scrutiny and skepticism from both instructors and fellow recruits who questioned whether women belonged in combat roles. The defining moment of her recruit training came during the Crucible, the final test that every Marine must pass to earn the title. It was a 54-hour period of sleep deprivation, limited food, and constant physical and mental challenges designed to push recruits to their absolute limits. During one particularly challenging obstacle, Sarah's team was struggling to complete a task that required precise coordination and communication. Several of her male teammates were ready to give up, but Sarah stepped forward and took charge. Her leadership during that moment wasn't about yelling or intimidation, it was about clear communication and unwavering determination. She organized her team, identified each person's strengths, and developed a strategy that allowed them to complete the obstacle successfully. Her drill instructor, Senior Drill Instructor Gunnery Sergeant Patricia Williams, pulled her aside afterward. Williams was a 20-year veteran who had mentored dozens of female Marines, and she told Sarah something that would stay with her throughout her career: leadership wasn't about being the loudest person in the room, but about being the one others trusted to make the right decisions under pressure. When Sarah graduated from Paris Island, she was selected for Officer Candidate School, a distinction earned by fewer than 5% of female recruits. Her mother attended the graduation ceremony, watching with a mixture of pride and concern as her daughter received the Eagle, Globe, and Anchor that marked her transformation from civilian to Marine. Rosa still didn't understand her daughter's choice, but she could see the confidence and purpose that military training had instilled in her. Officer Candidate School at Quantico was a different kind of challenge. Where recruit training had focused on breaking down civilian habits and rebuilding them along military lines, OCS was about developing leadership skills and tactical thinking. Sarah excelled in classroom work, particularly in courses on military history and strategy. She studied the campaigns of Alexander the Great and Napoleon, but also the more recent innovations in warfare that had emerged from conflicts in Iraq and Afghanistan. It was during OCS that Sarah first encountered the kind of subtle discrimination that would follow her throughout her career. Some of her male classmates, particularly those from military families, questioned whether women had the physical and emotional resilience necessary for combat leadership. These weren't overt attacks, but rather comments and attitudes that suggested she was taking a spot that should belong to a man. Sarah learned to respond to these challenges not with anger, but with performance. She consistently scored in the top 10% of her class and demonstrated leadership skills that impressed even her harshest critics. The most significant relationship Sarah developed during OCS was with Major Robert Chen, an instructor who specialized in counterinsurgency tactics. Chen was a veteran of multiple deployments in Afghanistan and had a reputation for being tough but fair. He recognized Sarah's analytical abilities and began mentoring her in the complexities of modern warfare. Chen taught her that successful military leaders needed to understand not just tactics and strategy, but also the political and cultural factors that influenced modern conflicts. Under Chen's guidance, Sarah developed a specialty in cultural intelligence and counterinsurgency operations. She studied Arabic and Pashto, understanding that future conflicts would require officers who could navigate complex cultural landscapes. This specialization would later prove crucial to her career advancement, but during OCS, it simply set her apart as someone who was thinking beyond traditional military roles. When Sarah was commissioned as a second lieutenant, her mother attended the ceremony at Quantico. Rosa had never seen her daughter in dress blues, and the sight of Sarah standing at attention, receiving her gold bars, finally made the transformation real. Rosa began to understand that this wasn't just a job for her daughter, it was a calling that had given Sarah a sense of purpose and identity that civilian life never could have provided. Sarah's first assignment was to Camp Pendleton, California, where she would serve as a platoon leader with the 1st Marine Division. The transition from student to leader was immediate and challenging. At 22 years old, she was responsible for 30 Marines, many of whom were older and more experienced than she was. The key to her success was her willingness to listen to her senior enlisted personnel while maintaining the authority necessary to make difficult decisions. Her first deployment came less than a year later, when her unit was sent to Afghanistan as part of Operation Enduring Freedom. Sarah's role involved working with local village leaders to develop intelligence networks that could help identify insurgent activities. It was dangerous, complex work that required her to navigate not just military challenges, but cultural and political sensitivities that could have life or death consequences. During one particularly challenging mission, Sarah's convoy was ambushed while traveling between villages. The attack lasted for 40 minutes, with her unit pinned down by sniper fire and improvised explosive devices. Sarah coordinated the defense while calling in air support and medical evacuation for wounded Marines. Her calm leadership under fire earned her a Bronze Star and the respect of every Marine in her unit. More importantly, it proved to herself and others that she belonged in combat roles. The success of her first deployment led to rapid promotions and increasingly important assignments. Sarah served in Iraq during the surge, leading a company-sized unit in some of the most dangerous areas around Baghdad. She developed a reputation for innovative tactics and careful attention to the welfare of her Marines. Senior officers began to recognize her as someone with exceptional potential for higher command positions. By her 10th year of service, Sarah had been promoted to major and was serving as a battalion operations officer. Her responsibilities included planning and coordinating complex operations involving hundreds of Marines and millions of dollars worth of equipment. She had proven herself in every assignment, earning advanced degrees in international relations and strategic studies while maintaining the physical fitness standards that were crucial to her credibility as a combat leader. The promotion to lieutenant colonel came with an assignment that would define the next phase of her career. Sarah was selected to serve as the commanding officer of a Marine Expeditionary Unit, a position that had never been held by a woman. The appointment generated significant attention within the Marine Corps and among military observers who saw it as a historic milestone for female officers. But, with this recognition came increased scrutiny and pressure. Sarah understood that her performance would be seen as representative of all female Marines, and that any failure on her part would be used to question the wisdom of allowing women in combat roles. She prepared for the assignment with characteristic intensity, studying every aspect of expeditionary operations and building relationships with the senior enlisted personnel who would be crucial to her unit's success. The irony of Sarah's situation was that her success had made her less visible rather than more so. As she had advanced in rank and responsibility, she spent less time in field uniforms and more time in offices and conference rooms. Many junior Marines knew her by reputation but had never seen her in person. This anonymity would soon create a situation that would test everything she had learned about leadership, respect, and the complex dynamics of military hierarchy. Lance Corporal Marcus Thompson had been in the Marine Corps for exactly 18 months, and he thought he had figured out how the system worked. At 20 years old, he carried himself with the confidence of someone who had survived recruit training, completed his military occupational specialty school, and had just returned from his first deployment to Afghanistan. In his mind, these experiences had given him the knowledge necessary to navigate the complex hierarchy that governed military life. Marcus had grown up in suburban Atlanta, the son of a middle-class family that had never had any connection to the military. His father was an accountant, his mother taught elementary school, and his older sister was finishing her junior year at Georgia Tech. The Thompson family had always emphasized education and professional achievement, expecting Marcus to follow a similar path. When he announced during his senior year of high school that he intended to enlist in the Marines, his parents were shocked and disappointed. The decision to enlist had not come from any family tradition or deep patriotic calling. Instead, Marcus had been struggling academically and felt lost about his future direction. College seemed like an expensive way to delay making real decisions about his life, and he was attracted to the structure and clear expectations that military service offered. The Marines, with their reputation for discipline and excellence, seemed like the perfect way to prove to himself and his family that he could succeed at something challenging. Boot camp at Paris Island had been the defining experience of Marcus's young life. The physical and mental challenges had pushed him beyond anything he had previously experienced, but he had thrived under the structure and clear expectations. His drill instructors had recognized his potential as a leader, and he had graduated as the platoon guide, a distinction that filled him with pride and confidence about his military future. After completing infantry training at Camp Geiger, Marcus was assigned to Camp Pendleton as part of the 3rd Battalion, 1st Marine Regiment. His first year had been spent in training exercises and preparation for deployment, learning the technical and tactical skills that would be essential for combat operations. He had approached this training with intensity and dedication, earning the respect of his peers and the attention of his squad leaders. Marcus's first deployment to Afghanistan had been everything he had expected and more. His unit had been stationed at Forward Operating Base Dalaram in Nimroz Province, one of the most dangerous areas in the country. The base was regularly subjected to rocket attacks and the surrounding area was heavily infiltrated by Taliban fighters who used improvised explosive devices and sniper attacks to harass Marine patrols. During his 7 months in Afghanistan, Marcus had participated in dozens of combat patrols and several major operations designed to clear insurgents from key areas. He had performed well under fire, earning a Combat Action Ribbon and the respect of his fellow Marines. The deployment had given him confidence in his abilities and reinforced his belief that he understood what it meant to be a Marine. But the experience that Marcus considered most significant from his deployment had nothing to do with combat. It involved the incident with a female intelligence analyst attached to his unit, a staff sergeant who had tried to give him instructions about proper procedures for handling classified materials. Marcus had questioned her authority, not directly challenging her orders but making comments that suggested he didn't believe she understood the realities of combat operations. The confrontation had been resolved quickly by Marcus's squad leader, who had taken him aside and explained the intelligence analyst's background. She was a veteran of multiple deployments with a specialized skill set that was crucial to the mission. The squad leader had told Marcus that questioning the competence of female Marines, particularly those in specialized roles, was a sign of inexperience and immaturity. Marcus had accepted the correction, but privately he remained skeptical about women in military roles. His experiences during deployment had been primarily with male Marines, and he had developed a worldview that associated military competence with traditional masculine characteristics. He believed that while women might have roles in support positions, true leadership in combat situations required physical and emotional qualities that were inherently male. This attitude was reinforced by conversations with other young Marines who shared similar views. They would discuss their opinions during off-duty hours, creating an echo chamber that validated their assumptions about gender roles in the military. These discussions often centered around physical fitness standards, with Marcus and his peers arguing that different standards for men and women undermined the principle of equality that was supposed to govern military service. When Marcus returned from Afghanistan, he was assigned to work in the Battalion Operations Center, a position that was considered a step up for a junior enlisted Marine. The job involved maintaining communications equipment, processing reports from field units, and supporting the planning staff with administrative tasks. It was detailed work that required attention to precision and the ability to handle classified information responsibly. The operations center was located in a building that housed several staff sections, including the offices of senior officers who were responsible for planning and coordinating battalion operations. Marcus rarely interacted with these officers directly, but he was aware of their presence and understood that they represented the pinnacle of military leadership. In his mind, these senior leaders were invariably experienced combat veterans who had proven themselves through years of service in challenging assignments. Marcus's immediate supervisor was Staff Sergeant Patricia Rodriguez, a veteran with 12 years of service who had earned a reputation for technical competence and attention to detail. Rodriguez recognized Marcus's potential but was concerned about his attitudes toward authority and his tendency to make assumptions about people based on limited information. She had tried to mentor him, explaining that successful military careers required the ability to work with all types of people and to respect the chain of command regardless of personal opinions. But Marcus had difficulty accepting guidance from Rodriguez, partly because she was female and partly because she had never served in a combat role. He believed that his deployment experience gave him insights that she couldn't understand, and he often questioned her decisions or suggestions in ways that bordered on insubordination. Rodriguez had documented these incidents and was considering whether to recommend that Marcus be transferred to a different assignment. The turning point in Marcus's attitude came during a training exercise where he was assigned to work with a team that included several female Marines in leadership positions. The exercise involved a simulated combat scenario where the team had to plan and execute a complex mission under time pressure. Marcus had expected to take a leadership role based on his combat experience, but found himself working under a female sergeant who had never deployed. The sergeant, Maria Santos, was a logistics specialist who had joined the Marines 6 years earlier and had earned a reputation for exceptional organizational skills. During the exercise, she demonstrated a level of tactical understanding and leadership ability that impressed even Marcus. She coordinated the team's activities with precision, made sound decisions under pressure, and ensured that the mission was completed successfully. After the exercise, Marcus found himself confused and somewhat embarrassed by his preconceptions. Santos had clearly demonstrated competence that had nothing to do with gender or combat experience. She had earned her leadership position through knowledge, skill, and dedication, exactly the qualities that Marcus believed should determine military advancement. The experience forced him to question some of his assumptions, but didn't completely change his worldview. Instead of learning the broader lesson about judging people based on their abilities rather than their demographics, Marcus developed a more nuanced but still problematic perspective. He began to believe that while some women could be competent in certain military roles, these were exceptions rather than the rule. He maintained his belief that combat leadership required qualities that were more naturally present in men, and he continued to view female Marines with skepticism until they proved themselves to his satisfaction. This attitude was reinforced by his social circle, which consisted primarily of other young male Marines who shared similar views. They would gather at local bars and restaurants near Camp Pendleton, discussing their experiences and reinforcing each other's preconceptions about military hierarchy and gender roles. These conversations often involved criticism of policies that they believed gave unfair advantages to female Marines or lowered standards to accommodate physical differences. Marcus's understanding of military rank and protocol was technically correct but limited by his experience and perspective. He knew the proper forms of address, understood the chain of command, and could recognize insignia and ribbons. But his knowledge was primarily theoretical, based on regulations and brief interactions with senior officers during formal ceremonies or inspections. He had never worked closely with high-ranking officers and had no real understanding of the complex factors that determine promotion and advancement in the modern military. The gap in Marcus's understanding was particularly significant when it came to female officers in senior positions. Because he had limited exposure to women in leadership roles, he made assumptions about their capabilities based on stereotypes rather than evidence. He believed that female officers had achieved their positions through policies designed to promote diversity rather than merit, and he questioned whether they possessed the combat experience and leadership skills necessary for their responsibilities. This mindset was about to collide with reality in a way that would fundamentally challenge everything Marcus thought he knew about military leadership and respect. The incident would occur in the most mundane setting possible, during a routine lunch break in the base mess hall, and it would involve a Marine whose background and achievements were so far beyond Marcus's experience that he couldn't even begin to comprehend them. The mess hall at Camp Pendleton was a place where military hierarchy was temporarily relaxed, where Marines of all ranks gathered to eat and socialize during their brief breaks from duty. It was one of the few places where junior enlisted personnel might find themselves in close proximity to senior officers, though interactions between different ranks were generally minimal and respectful. Marcus had developed habits and routines around his mealtimes, often sitting with the same group of Marines and engaging in conversations that reinforced his worldview. He was comfortable in this environment, confident in his understanding of military protocol and social dynamics. He believed that he could accurately assess the rank and role of any Marine based on their appearance, demeanor, and the way others interacted with them. This confidence was about to be tested in a way that would expose the limitations of his understanding and force him to confront the consequences of making assumptions about people based on incomplete information. The lesson he was about to learn would be delivered not through formal instruction or gentle correction, but through a moment of public humiliation that would resonate throughout the base and become a defining experience in his military career. The stage was set for a confrontation that would reveal the dangerous gap between Marcus's perception of military leadership and the reality of how the modern Marine Corps actually operated. His assumptions about gender, rank, and respect were about to collide with someone whose achievements and background represented everything he claimed to value in military service, but whose appearance and demeanor challenged every stereotype he had constructed about what leadership looked like. The irony was that Marcus genuinely believed he was upholding military standards and traditions. He saw himself as someone who respected the chain of command and understood the importance of military discipline. But his understanding was superficial and corrupted by prejudices that prevented him from recognizing excellence when it didn't conform to his expectations. The education he was about to receive would be swift, public, and unforgettable, delivered by someone who embodied the very qualities he claimed to respect but had failed to recognize. The morning of March 15 started like any other Tuesday at Camp Pendleton. The California sun was beginning to break through the marine layer that often covered the base in the early hours, and Marines across the installation were beginning their daily routines. For Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Martinez, the day began at 0530 hours with a 5-mile run along the perimeter road, followed by a quick shower and review of her schedule for the day. Sarah had arrived at Camp Pendleton 6 weeks earlier to assume command of the 2nd Marine Expeditionary Unit, a position that represented the culmination of her 15-year career. The assignment was significant not just for her personally, but for the Marine Corps as a whole. She was the first woman to command an MEU, and her performance would be closely watched by military leaders, policymakers, and critics who questioned whether women could handle such complex and demanding responsibilities. The transition had gone more smoothly than Sarah had anticipated. Her predecessor, Colonel James Patterson, had been generous with his time during the change of command period, introducing her to key personnel and briefing her on ongoing operations. The senior enlisted leadership had been professional and supportive, understanding that their success depended on her success. Most importantly, the Marines under her command had responded positively to her leadership style, which emphasized clear communication and shared responsibility. But Sarah was not naive about the challenges she faced. She understood that there were Marines within her command who questioned her qualifications and were waiting for her to fail. She had dealt with similar skepticism throughout her career and had learned that the best response was consistent, excellent performance. She couldn't control what people thought about her appointment, but she could control how well she did the job. The morning briefing in Sarah's office had covered routine operational matters. Her executive officer, Major Robert Kim, had updated her on training schedules and equipment status. Her operations officer had briefed her on upcoming exercises and coordination requirements with other units. Her sergeant major, a 25-year veteran named Thomas Washington, had discussed personnel issues and morale concerns. The meeting had been efficient and productive, the kind of professional interaction that Sarah valued. After the briefing, Sarah had spent 2 hours reviewing budget documents and training reports, the kind of administrative work that consumed much of a senior officer's time but rarely received public attention. She had a conference call scheduled with officials at Marine Corps headquarters in the afternoon, followed by a meeting with civilian contractors who were providing specialized equipment for an upcoming deployment. The schedule was typical for someone in her position, a mixture of strategic planning, administrative oversight, and relationship management that required different skills but equal attention to detail. By 1200 hours, Sarah was ready for a break. She had been working steadily for 6 hours and needed food and a few minutes away from her office. The mess hall was a 5-minute walk from her building, and she decided to eat lunch there rather than having something brought to her office. It was a decision that would seem insignificant in the moment but would have consequences that neither she nor anyone else could have anticipated. Sarah changed out of her service uniform and into Marine Corps combat utilities, the camouflage uniform worn for training and field operations. The utilities were comfortable and practical, but they also had the effect of making her less recognizable to Marines who knew her primarily through formal ceremonies or official photographs. The utility uniform didn't display the same rank insignia as service uniforms, and many junior Marines were not familiar enough with the subtle indicators of senior officer rank to immediately recognize her status. The walk to the mess hall took Sarah through areas of the base where she rarely spent time. She passed training areas where junior Marines were conducting physical fitness activities and maintenance bays where mechanics were working on vehicles. Several Marines recognized her and offered appropriate greetings, but most were focused on their own activities and paid little attention to her passage. Sarah enjoyed these moments of relative anonymity, when she could observe the daily operations of her command without the formal protocols that typically surrounded her interactions with subordinates. The mess hall was busy when Sarah arrived, filled with Marines from across the base who were taking their lunch break. The facility could accommodate nearly 500 people at once, and during peak hours it was a bustling environment where conversations and activities created a constant background of noise and movement. Sarah appreciated the energy of the place, the sense of community and shared experience that was fundamental to military life. Sarah went through the serving line like any other Marine, selecting her food and chatting briefly with the civilian staff who prepared and served meals. She chose a table in a relatively quiet section of the mess hall, away from the larger groups of Marines who were engaged in animated discussions about sports, training, and weekend plans. She preferred to eat in peace, using the time to decompress from the morning's activities and prepare mentally for the afternoon's responsibilities. Meanwhile, Lance Corporal Marcus Thompson was having lunch with 3 other Marines from his unit. They had claimed a table in the center of the mess hall, a location that allowed them to observe the comings and goings of other Marines while engaging in the kind of casual conversation that helped build unit cohesion. Marcus was in a particularly good mood because he had just learned that he was being considered for promotion to corporal, an advancement that would bring increased responsibility and pay. The conversation at Marcus's table had turned to their upcoming training schedule, which included a major exercise that would involve multiple units and simulate complex combat scenarios. Marcus and his companions were discussing their roles in the exercise and speculating about how their performance might affect their career prospects. The discussion had a competitive edge, with each Marine trying to demonstrate his knowledge and commitment to excellence. It was during this conversation that Marcus first noticed the female Marine sitting alone at a nearby table. She appeared to be in her early 30s, with short dark hair and a slender build that suggested regular physical fitness training. She was wearing combat utilities without any obvious indicators of rank, and she seemed to be reading something on her phone while eating. To Marcus and his companions, she appeared to be a staff non-commissioned officer, probably a staff sergeant or gunnery sergeant taking a quiet lunch break. The presence of the female Marine sparked a continuation of ongoing discussions that Marcus and his friends had been having about women in military roles. One of his companions, Lance Corporal David Chen, made a comment about female Marines getting special treatment in assignments and promotions. Another, Lance Corporal Michael Rodriguez, expressed skepticism about whether women could handle the physical demands of combat operations. The conversation was not particularly malicious, but it reflected the kind of casual sexism that was still present in some corners of military culture. Marcus contributed to the discussion by sharing his experiences from Afghanistan, emphasizing the physical and mental challenges that he believed were inherently more difficult for women to manage. He spoke about long patrols carrying heavy equipment, the need for upper body strength in combat situations, and the psychological pressures of leadership under fire. His comments were presented as objective observations based on experience, but they reflected deeply held assumptions about gender capabilities that had never been seriously challenged. The conversation might have continued indefinitely without consequences, remaining as merely another example of immature thinking among young Marines who had limited understanding of the complexities of military service. But Marcus made a decision that transformed the situation from theoretical discussion to practical confrontation. He decided to approach the female Marine and engage her in conversation, apparently motivated by a desire to demonstrate his knowledge and confidence to his companions. Marcus stood up from his table and walked over to where Sarah was sitting. His intention, as he would later explain, was to make conversation and, perhaps, offer some friendly advice about military life. He believed that his deployment experience and understanding of Marine Corps culture qualified him to serve as an informal mentor to someone he assumed was junior to him in both rank and experience. It was a gesture that he thought demonstrated leadership and commitment to unit cohesion. Sarah noticed Marcus approaching but didn't immediately look up from her phone. She was reading an email from her sister, who was updating her on family news from Texas, and she was enjoying the brief mental escape from military responsibilities. She assumed that the young Marine was simply walking past her table on his way to somewhere else in the mess hall. It wasn't unusual for junior Marines to move around the facility during lunch hours, and she had no reason to expect any interaction. Marcus stopped directly in front of Sarah's table and cleared his throat to get her attention. When she looked up, he smiled and introduced himself using his rank and last name, following the protocol that Marines used when meeting for the first time. He asked if he could sit down, explaining that he had noticed she was eating alone and thought she might enjoy some company. His tone was friendly but carried an undertone of condescension that suggested he believed he was doing her a favor. Sarah's initial reaction was polite confusion. She didn't recognize Marcus, which was not unusual given the size of the base and the number of Marines under her command. But his presumption in approaching her and offering company suggested either remarkable boldness or significant misunderstanding of their relative positions. She responded neutrally, neither encouraging nor discouraging his presence, while trying to assess the situation and determine the most appropriate response. Marcus interpreted Sarah's neutral response as permission to continue the interaction. He sat down across from her and began what he intended as friendly conversation about life on base, training activities, and general military topics. But his comments consistently reflected assumptions about her experience and knowledge that were completely incorrect. He offered advice about dealing with senior enlisted personnel, suggested ways to improve her performance in physical fitness tests, and made observations about military life that implied he was speaking to someone with limited experience. The situation became increasingly awkward as Marcus continued to demonstrate his misunderstanding of who he was talking to. He mentioned his deployment to Afghanistan and spoke about it in ways that suggested he believed Sarah had never been in combat. He offered opinions about military leadership that revealed his limited understanding of how senior decision-making actually worked. Most problematically, he made comments about female Marines that were intended to be supportive but actually revealed deeply problematic attitudes about gender roles in the military. Sarah found herself in a difficult position. She could end the interaction immediately by revealing her rank and identity, but doing so would likely embarrass Marcus in front of the entire mess hall and create exactly the kind of dramatic scene that she preferred to avoid. She could continue to engage politely while gently correcting his assumptions, but his comments were becoming increasingly inappropriate and reflected attitudes that needed to be addressed. Most challenging, his presence at her table was beginning to attract attention from other Marines in the mess hall, who were curious about the unusual interaction. The conversation reached a critical point when Marcus began discussing his opinions about women in combat roles. He acknowledged that female Marines could be competent in support positions, but expressed doubts about their effectiveness in direct combat situations. He cited physical fitness standards and combat load requirements as evidence that gender integration in combat arms was more about political correctness than military effectiveness. His tone remained friendly and conversational, but his words reflected exactly the kind of thinking that Sarah had been fighting against throughout her career. Sarah's patience was beginning to wear thin, but she maintained her composure while considering her options. She could challenge Marcus's statements directly, but doing so without revealing her identity might lead to an extended argument that would accomplish nothing positive. She could simply excuse herself and leave, but that would allow his problematic attitudes to go uncorrected and might be interpreted as validation of his opinions. She could reveal her rank and use it to shut down the conversation, but that approach would focus attention on hierarchy rather than the substantive problems with his thinking. The decision was taken out of Sarah's hands when Marcus made a comment that crossed the line from ignorant to insulting. He suggested that female Marines in senior positions had probably achieved their ranks through political considerations rather than merit, and that their presence in leadership roles created unfair advantages and lowered standards that ultimately weakened military effectiveness. His words were delivered with a casual confidence that suggested he believed he was stating obvious facts that any reasonable person would acknowledge. Sarah's response was immediate and sharp. She told Marcus that his comments were inappropriate and reflected ignorance about military policy and the qualifications of female service members. She pointed out that his assumptions were based on stereotypes rather than evidence, and that his attitude toward female Marines was incompatible with professional military service. Her tone remained controlled, but there was an edge of authority that should have warned Marcus that he was dealing with someone who was not impressed by his opinions. But Marcus misinterpreted Sarah's response as defensiveness rather than authority. Instead of recognizing that he had overstepped appropriate boundaries, he doubled down on his comments and became more argumentative. He challenged Sarah's knowledge of military policy and suggested that her reaction proved that women were too emotional for objective discussions about military effectiveness. He implied that she was taking his comments personally rather than considering them on their merits, and he urged her to approach the topic with more professional detachment. The interaction had now attracted the attention of Marines throughout the immediate area. Several tables had quieted their conversations to listen to what was becoming an increasingly heated exchange. Some Marines recognized that something significant was happening, even if they didn't understand the full context. Others simply found the argument entertaining and were curious to see how it would develop. The mess hall, which had been filled with the normal sounds of casual conversation and movement, had developed pockets of unusual quiet as people focused their attention on Marcus and Sarah. It was at this moment that Marcus made the decision that would define the rest of his military career. Frustrated by what he perceived as Sarah's unreasonable response to his reasonable comments, he decided to assert his authority as a combat veteran and experienced Marine. He stood up from the table and, in a voice loud enough to be heard by Marines several tables away, told Sarah that she needed to show more respect for Marines who had actually served in combat and earned the right to express opinions about military effectiveness. The mess hall fell completely silent. Every conversation stopped, every movement paused, as Marines throughout the facility focused their attention on what was clearly becoming a major incident. Marcus had just publicly challenged someone in a way that suggested either remarkable courage or devastating ignorance about who he was dealing with. The tension was palpable as Marines waited to see how the situation would develop. Sarah remained seated, but her posture and expression had changed completely. The polite confusion of a few minutes earlier had been replaced by the unmistakable bearing of senior military authority. When she spoke, her voice was calm but carried the kind of command presence that only comes from years of leadership experience in challenging situations. She told Marcus that he had made a serious mistake and that his assumptions about her background and qualifications were completely incorrect. Marcus, still believing that he was dealing with a defensive female Marine who was upset about his comments, decided to escalate the confrontation further. He told Sarah to stand up and show proper respect when addressing a combat veteran. His voice had risen to an earshout, and his body language suggested that he was prepared to make the interaction physical if necessary. He had convinced himself that he was upholding military standards and defending the honor of Marines who had earned their positions through combat service rather than political considerations. It was then that Sarah stood up, and everything changed. When Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Martinez stood up, the change in the mess hall's atmosphere was immediate and dramatic. What had moments before been curiosity and casual attention suddenly became intense focus and growing realization that something extraordinary was about to unfold. Sarah's movement was deliberate and controlled, carrying the unmistakable bearing of someone accustomed to command authority in the most challenging circumstances. The first Marines to recognize what was happening were the senior enlisted personnel scattered throughout the mess hall. Gunnery sergeants and staff sergeants who had been eating lunch while monitoring the developing situation suddenly understood that they were witnessing something that would require immediate attention and careful management. Several began moving closer to the scene, not to intervene directly but to position themselves to provide support if the situation escalated beyond what could be handled through normal disciplinary channels. Sergeant Major Thomas Washington had been eating lunch at a corner table when the confrontation began. As the senior enlisted Marine on the base, Washington had developed an instinct for identifying situations that could affect unit cohesion and discipline. He had been watching the interaction between Marcus and Sarah with growing concern, initially assuming it was simply a case of inappropriate social behavior that would resolve itself quickly. When he realized the true nature of what was developing, Washington immediately stood up and began moving toward the center of the mess hall. The revelation came in stages, each more devastating to Marcus than the last. Sarah began by asking Marcus if he was familiar with the chain of command structure for the 2nd Marine Expeditionary Unit. Her question was delivered in a tone that suggested she already knew the answer and was providing him an opportunity to demonstrate his knowledge before proceeding. Marcus, still confident in his position and unaware of the danger he was in, replied that he understood the basic structure but wasn't familiar with specific personnel assignments. Sarah then asked if Marcus knew who commanded the MEU, and whether he had ever seen that commander in person. The question was followed by complete silence in the mess hall, as Marines throughout the facility realized that they were about to witness either a remarkable coincidence or a career-ending mistake. Marcus replied that he knew the MEU was commanded by a lieutenant colonel but admitted he had never met the commanding officer personally. His tone suggested that he found the questions irrelevant to their discussion about female Marines in combat roles. The moment of truth came when Sarah identified herself by name, rank, and position. She spoke clearly and deliberately, ensuring that every Marine in the mess hall could hear and understand exactly who Marcus had been lecturing about military leadership and combat effectiveness. The impact of her words was like a physical blow, creating a wave of reaction that rippled through the facility as Marines processed the magnitude of what they had just witnessed. Marcus's reaction was immediate and devastating. The color drained from his face as he realized that he had just spent 15 minutes insulting and dismissing someone who not only outranked him by several levels but who held one of the most prestigious command positions in the Marine Corps. His confident posture collapsed into something approaching paralysis as he tried to process the implications of what had just happened. For several seconds, he seemed unable to speak or move, standing frozen in front of the table while hundreds of Marines watched his humiliation unfold. The silence in the mess hall was absolute. Marines who had been engaged in casual conversation moments earlier were now staring in fascination and horror at a scene that would be discussed throughout the base for months to come. Many were pulling out phones to record what was happening, understanding that they were witnessing something that would become legendary within Marine Corps culture. Others were simply trying to process what they had seen, struggling to understand how such a massive misunderstanding could have occurred. Sergeant Major Washington reached the scene just as Sarah finished identifying herself. As the senior enlisted Marine present, Washington understood that he had multiple responsibilities in the situation. He needed to ensure that military discipline and protocols were maintained, protect the dignity of both the commanding officer and the junior Marine involved, and minimize the potential for the incident to cause broader problems within the unit. His first action was to quietly but firmly clear the immediate area around the table, creating space for the situation to be resolved without additional audience participation. Sarah's response to Marcus's obvious distress demonstrated the leadership qualities that had earned her the command position. Rather than using the moment to humiliate him further or assert her authority in ways that would destroy his military career, she took control of the situation with professionalism and measured judgment. She instructed Marcus to sit down and listen carefully to what she was about to tell him, speaking in a tone that was firm but not hostile. The lesson that followed was delivered with precision and impact that would resonate far beyond the immediate participants. Sarah explained to Marcus that his assumptions about her background were not just incorrect but represented exactly the kind of thinking that weakened military effectiveness and unit cohesion. She detailed her combat experience, including multiple deployments to Afghanistan and Iraq, specific operations where she had led Marines under fire, and decorations she had earned for valor and leadership in combat situations. But Sarah's correction went beyond simply establishing her credentials. She used the moment to address the broader problems with Marcus's attitudes toward female Marines and military leadership. She explained that his comments reflected ignorance about military policy, misunderstanding of how promotion and advancement actually worked, and prejudices that were incompatible with the values and standards of the Marine Corps. Her words were educational rather than punitive, designed to help Marcus understand not just what he had done wrong but why his thinking needed to change. The educational aspect of Sarah's response included specific examples of female Marines who had distinguished themselves in combat roles, policy changes that had expanded opportunities based on demonstrated capability rather than political considerations, and the complex factors that senior leaders considered when making decisions about personnel and operations. She spoke about the evolution of military culture and the importance of judging individuals based on their performance rather than demographic characteristics. Throughout her response, Sarah maintained the kind of composure and professionalism that exemplified effective military leadership. She did not raise her voice or use language that would embarrass Marcus unnecessarily. Instead, she demonstrated the qualities of patience, clarity, and educational focus that were essential for developing junior personnel. Her approach showed Marines throughout the mess hall what competent leadership looked like when dealing with difficult situations that required both discipline and mentorship. Marcus's education continued as other senior Marines began to share information about Sarah's background and achievements. Word spread quickly through the mess hall about her Bronze Star, her previous command assignments, and her reputation as one of the most capable officers in the Marine Corps. Marines who had served under her previous commands spoke about her leadership during combat operations and her commitment to the welfare and development of her subordinates. The stories that emerged painted a picture of an officer whose achievements went far beyond what Marcus had imagined possible. Sarah had commanded a company during the surge in Iraq, leading complex operations in urban environments that required both tactical skill and cultural sensitivity. She had served as an operations officer for a Marine Expeditionary Force, coordinating activities involving thousands of Marines and millions of dollars worth of equipment. She had attended advanced military schools, earned advanced degrees, and been selected for positions that were only offered to the most promising officers in the service. But the most significant aspect of Sarah's background was her reputation among the Marines who had served under her command. Junior enlisted personnel who had worked with her in previous assignments spoke about her willingness to listen to their concerns, her commitment to their professional development, and her ability to make difficult decisions that protected their welfare while accomplishing the mission. Senior non-commissioned officers described her as someone who understood the importance of their experience and expertise, who consulted with them regularly and incorporated their recommendations into her decision-making. As the full scope of Sarah's achievements became clear, Marcus began to understand not just the magnitude of his mistake but the deeper problems with his worldview that had made such a mistake possible. He had been so confident in his assumptions about military leadership and gender roles that he had failed to consider the possibility that his understanding might be incomplete or incorrect. His prejudices had blinded him to obvious indicators that the person he was talking to possessed far more experience and authority than he had imagined. The lesson was made more powerful by the presence of other Marines who had served in combat but who immediately recognized Sarah's superior qualifications and experience. Marcus had believed that his deployment to Afghanistan gave him special insight into military effectiveness and leadership, but he was surrounded by Marines whose combat experience was more extensive and whose understanding of military culture was more sophisticated. Their respect for Sarah was obvious and immediate, demonstrating that Marcus's attitudes were not shared by other combat veterans. Sergeant Major Washington used the situation as an opportunity to provide additional education to all Marines present about the importance of military courtesy and proper protocols for interacting with personnel of different ranks. He explained that military discipline required Marines to show respect based on rank and position, regardless of their personal opinions about policies or individuals. He emphasized that challenging senior personnel required following established procedures and channels rather than casual confrontation in public settings. Washington also addressed the broader implications of the incident for unit cohesion and discipline. He explained that Marcus's behavior had not only been disrespectful to Sarah personally but had also undermined the command structure that was essential for military effectiveness. He pointed out that Marines throughout the mess hall had witnessed a junior enlisted person challenging a senior officer in ways that violated fundamental principles of military order and discipline. The educational aspects of the incident were reinforced by discussions among Marines at various levels about the lessons that could be learned from what had happened. Junior enlisted personnel talked about the importance of understanding chain of command and showing appropriate respect for senior personnel. Non-commissioned officers discussed the challenges of mentoring young Marines who had strong opinions but limited understanding of military culture and policy. Senior enlisted personnel and officers used the incident as a case study in leadership development and the management of difficult personnel situations. They analyzed Sarah's response and identified specific techniques she had used to address the problem while maintaining professional standards and unit cohesion. They discussed alternative approaches that might have been used and the potential consequences of different responses. The incident also sparked broader conversations about gender integration in the military and the challenges faced by female service members in proving their qualifications and earning respect from their peers. Many Marines acknowledged that they had harbored similar doubts about female capabilities in combat roles, and Marcus's public education became an opportunity for them to examine and reconsider their own assumptions. As the immediate crisis passed and normal activities resumed in the mess hall, it became clear that the incident would have lasting effects that extended far beyond the immediate participants. Marcus faced immediate administrative consequences and would need to demonstrate significant changes in his attitudes and behavior to continue his military career. Sarah had handled a challenging situation with professionalism that enhanced her reputation and provided a model for other leaders dealing with similar problems. But the broader impact involved changes in how Marines throughout the base thought about leadership, respect, and the assumptions they made about their colleagues. The incident had provided a dramatic demonstration of the dangers of judging people based on incomplete information and the importance of maintaining professional standards in all interactions. The lessons learned would be shared throughout the Marine Corps community and would influence how similar situations were handled in the future. The immediate aftermath of the mess hall incident was managed with the kind of swift professionalism that characterized effective military organizations. Within minutes of Sarah's revelation, Sergeant Major Washington had cleared the area and established protocols to ensure that the situation was handled through appropriate channels rather than becoming entertainment for the broader base community. However, despite these efforts, word of what had happened spread throughout Camp Pendleton with remarkable speed, carried by Marines who understood they had witnessed something significant. Marcus Thompson found himself in administrative limbo within hours of the confrontation. His immediate supervisor, Staff Sergeant Patricia Rodriguez, received notification of the incident and was directed to remove Marcus from his current duties pending a formal investigation. The process was routine in terms of procedure but extraordinary in terms of the circumstances that had triggered it. Rodriguez, who had been documenting Marcus's attitude problems for months, was not surprised by the incident but was shocked by its magnitude and public nature. The formal investigation that followed was conducted by Major Robert Kim, Sarah's executive officer, who had extensive experience in administrative and disciplinary matters. Kim's task was to document exactly what had happened, assess whether any regulations or policies had been violated, and recommend appropriate administrative action. The investigation was complicated by the public nature of the incident and the number of witnesses who had observed different aspects of the confrontation. Kim's interviews with witnesses revealed a consistent pattern that supported Sarah's account of the incident while also providing insight into Marcus's behavior and attitudes leading up to the confrontation. Marines who had observed the interaction described Marcus as increasingly aggressive and inappropriate in his comments, while characterizing Sarah's response as measured and professional despite the provocation she had received. The investigation also revealed that Marcus had made similar comments about female Marines on previous occasions, establishing a pattern of behavior that went beyond a single moment of poor judgment. The administrative consequences for Marcus were severe but not career-ending. He was formally counseled about his conduct, reduced in rank from lance corporal to private first class, and transferred to a different unit where he could receive more direct supervision and mentorship. The punishment was designed to address his immediate behavior while providing opportunities for rehabilitation and professional development. Military justice emphasized correction and education rather than purely punitive measures, particularly for junior personnel who demonstrated potential for improvement. But the informal consequences were more significant and long-lasting. Marcus's reputation throughout the base was permanently altered by the incident, and he found himself isolated from many of his previous social connections. Marines who had previously shared his opinions about military culture and gender roles distanced themselves from someone who had become associated with such spectacular poor judgment. The incident served as a cautionary tale that influenced how other Marines thought about challenging authority and making assumptions about their colleagues. The transfer to his new unit provided Marcus with a different perspective on military leadership and culture. His new supervisor was Gunnery Sergeant Lisa Chang, a veteran with 14 years of service who specialized in leadership development and personnel counseling. Chang had volunteered to work with Marcus because she believed that young Marines with attitude problems could often be reformed through proper mentorship and exposure to different perspectives. Chang's approach to working with Marcus was systematic and educational. She began by requiring him to research and write reports about the history of women in military service, focusing on specific individuals who had demonstrated exceptional courage and leadership in combat situations. The assignments were designed to challenge his assumptions while providing factual information about female contributions to military effectiveness throughout history. The educational process continued with practical experiences that exposed Marcus to the reality of how modern military units actually functioned. Chang arranged for him to work with female Marines in various specialties, observing their competence and professionalism in demanding situations. She also connected him with male Marines who had served under female commanders and could speak from personal experience about effective leadership regardless of gender. One of the most significant aspects of Marcus's rehabilitation involved meeting with Marines who had served with Sarah in previous assignments. These conversations provided him with detailed information about her leadership during combat operations and her reputation among personnel who had worked with her directly. The stories he heard contradicted every assumption he had made about female capabilities in military roles and forced him to confront the ignorance that had led to his public humiliation. The transformation in Marcus's thinking was gradual but genuine. As he learned more about military history and contemporary operations, he began to understand that his previous views had been based on stereotypes rather than evidence. He discovered that physical strength, while important in certain situations, was only one factor in military effectiveness, and that leadership required intellectual and emotional qualities that were distributed across all demographic groups. The process was not easy for Marcus, who struggled with the realization that his strongly held beliefs had been fundamentally incorrect. He experienced periods of denial and resistance, arguing that his experiences in Afghanistan had given him insights that academic study couldn't provide. But the weight of evidence gradually overcame his resistance, particularly when presented by combat veterans whose credentials were unquestionable. Chang documented Marcus's progress through regular counseling sessions and performance evaluations. She noted improvements in his attitude toward female colleagues, his willingness to accept guidance from senior personnel regardless of their background, and his growing understanding of military culture and values. The transformation was monitored carefully because the Marine Corps needed to ensure that personnel problems were genuinely resolved rather than simply suppressed. Meanwhile, Sarah's handling of the incident enhanced her already strong reputation as a leader who could manage difficult situations with professionalism and wisdom. Her response had demonstrated several key leadership qualities: the ability to remain composed under pressure, the wisdom to use challenging situations as educational opportunities, and the judgment to balance discipline with mentorship in ways that strengthened rather than weakened unit cohesion. The incident also provided Sarah with insights into the challenges faced by junior Marines who entered military service with limited understanding of military culture and values. She recognized that Marcus's attitudes, while problematic, were not entirely uncommon among young Marines who had limited exposure to diverse leadership and who had developed their understanding of military service from popular culture rather than direct experience. Sarah used these insights to develop new approaches to leadership development within her command. She instituted regular sessions where senior personnel shared their experiences and perspectives with junior Marines, creating opportunities for education and mentorship that could prevent similar incidents. She also emphasized the importance of professional development programs that exposed all personnel to the full range of military specialties and leadership styles. The broader impact of the incident extended throughout the Marine Corps community as the story spread through informal networks and official channels. Senior leaders used it as a case study in leadership education, analyzing both the circumstances that led to the confrontation and the techniques used to resolve it constructively. The incident became part of the curriculum and leadership courses, providing concrete examples of how assumptions and prejudices could interfere with military effectiveness. The story also contributed to ongoing discussions about gender integration in the military and the challenges of changing organizational culture in large institutions. military sociologists and policy experts analyze the incident as evidence of both the persistence of traditional attitudes and the effectiveness of educational approaches to addressing bias and discrimination. For many Marines, the incident served as a moment of reflection about their own assumptions and attitudes. Personnel throughout the base reported conversations with colleagues about respect, leadership, and the importance of judging people based on their capabilities rather than demographic characteristics. The public nature of Marcus's mistake made it impossible to ignore the consequences of prejudicial thinking, and many Marines made conscious efforts to examine and correct their own biases. The long-term effects on Marcus's career were mixed but ultimately positive. While the incident remained a permanent part of his personnel record, his demonstrated commitment to change and improvement gradually restored his reputation within the Marine Corps community. He completed his initial enlistment with satisfactory performance ratings and chose to extend his service for an additional 4 years, serving in increasingly responsible positions that tested his growth and development. During his extended service, Marcus had opportunities to work with female Marines in leadership positions, experiences that reinforced the lessons he had learned from his encounter with Sarah. He developed professional relationships based on mutual respect and shared commitment to mission accomplishment, discovering that effective military units required contributions from all personnel regardless of their background or demographic characteristics. Marcus eventually achieved the rank of corporal and was selected for leadership positions that allowed him to mentor other junior Marines. His experience with the consequences of prejudicial thinking made him particularly effective at identifying and correcting similar attitudes in young Marines who entered the service with limited understanding of military culture and values. He became known for his ability to help personnel develop professional perspectives that enhanced unit cohesion and effectiveness. The mentorship that Marcus provided to other Marines became one of the most positive outcomes of his original mistake. His first-hand understanding of how assumptions and prejudices could interfere with professional relationships allowed him to connect with junior personnel who might not have been receptive to guidance from Marines who had never struggled with similar issues. His credibility came from his willingness to admit his mistakes and demonstrate genuine change over time. Sarah's command of the Marine Expeditionary Unit continued for 18 months, during which time her leadership was tested in various training exercises and operational deployments. Her performance consistently exceeded expectations, and she earned a reputation as one of the most capable commanders in the Marine Corps. The incident in the mess hall became a footnote in a career distinguished by professional excellence and innovative leadership. The success of Sarah's command provided powerful evidence against critics who had questioned the wisdom of appointing women to senior leadership positions. Her ability to handle challenging situations, manage complex operations, and develop subordinate personnel demonstrated that military effectiveness depended on individual capabilities rather than demographic characteristics. Her example influenced personnel policies and inspired other female Marines to pursue leadership positions. The relationship between Sarah and Marcus evolved over time from antagonistic to respectful to genuinely collaborative. While they never became close personally, they developed a professional relationship based on mutual understanding of the lessons learned from their initial confrontation. Marcus's transformation validated Sarah's decision to handle the incident through education rather than purely punitive measures, while Sarah's continued success demonstrated the professional qualities that Marcus had initially failed to recognize. Years later, both Sarah and Marcus would reflect on the mess hall incident as a defining moment in their military careers. For Sarah, it represented successful navigation of one of the most challenging aspects of military leadership, correcting subordinate personnel while maintaining professional standards and unit cohesion. For Marcus, it marked the beginning of a personal transformation that ultimately made him a more effective Marine and a better person. The story became part of Marine Corps folklore, told and retold in various forms throughout the military community. Each telling emphasized different aspects of the lesson: the dangers of making assumptions about people, the importance of respecting military hierarchy, the value of educational approaches to personnel problems, and the qualities that define effective leadership in challenging situations. The incident also contributed to broader changes in military culture, particularly regarding attitudes toward diversity and inclusion. While individual stories rarely create institutional change by themselves, the mess hall confrontation became part of a larger conversation about respect, professionalism, and the evolution of military values in an increasingly diverse society. The ultimate legacy of the incident was the demonstration that military effectiveness required the best contributions from all personnel, regardless of their background or demographic characteristics. The story showed that prejudice and assumptions weaken units by preventing individuals from recognizing and utilizing the full range of talent and experience available to them. Most importantly, it proved that even deeply held biases could be changed through education, experience, and the commitment to professional growth that characterized the best military personnel. The transformation of Marcus Thompson from a prejudiced young Marine to a respected leader and mentor demonstrated the power of military institutions to develop character and professional competence in individuals who were willing to learn from their mistakes and commit to genuine change. His story became proof that rehabilitation and education could be more effective than punishment alone in creating the kind of personnel that modern military organizations require to accomplish their missions successfully.